Church, let me invite you to grab a seat.
Amen. Good morning. How are we doing this morning? It's good to see you. My name is Jason Hatch. I'm the lead pastor and the teaching pastor here at Redeemer. And before I jump into the message for this morning, that's going to kind of wrap up this series that we've been in for a few weeks, I'm going to call a little bit of a timeout, and we're going to have a little bit of a family meeting just for a moment. Just a couple things we got to work through. And first of all, I wanted to thank, I know as you came in, you probably saw some people out in the parking lot shivering and welcoming you and showing you where to park. How about a big thank you to the parking team? They were here early. You could see their breath, and I don't think they were here because they just love standing out in the cold, but they love Jesus, love you. We're here to serve you, so thankful for them. The welcome team that was out welcoming people, same thing. They're here because they love Jesus, they love the church, they want to help connect with new people. And how many of you love Redeemer kids? How many of you love and are so grateful for the leadership of Redeemer Kids, for those who faithfully, sacrificially, week in, week out, show up, they serve, they love, they teach? Are you? Okay, here's what I need from you. I'm going to let you know, because we don't have problems, we don't have challenges at Redeemer, we have opportunities. I've got an opportunity for you to help them help us. Redeemer Kids, what an unbelievably important ministry, as we are very dedicated to sowing the gospel into the next generation. And so I say often, like, we don't do childcare, so we've got to remove that terminology. We do ministry, so even babies, they're going to get prayed for, they're going to be invested in, we're going to show them the gospel and teach them to love and serve Jesus. And I don't know if you know this, but it has grown a lot the last year or so. We have had, I don't know if you know this, or you don't because I haven't told you yet, but this year, Unique Kids does not count the kids that are not unique. I say that every time, and every time it doesn't land. This year, 1,416 unique kids have been in our kids ministry and have been shepherded well. And I want to share two things. We have two main goals for the time that we have kids in here in Redeemer Kids. Goal is discipleship and safety. They're going to be discipled. They're going to hear about Jesus in a way that they can understand what does it look like for them to love and to serve God, to know who Jesus is. But secondly is safety. We want them to be safe, and so we have certain protocols and certain processes and things in place to make sure that that is a safe area where only people that need to be there get in there. And so how you can help us out, this has become a little bit of an increasing problem, is we just want to let you know that there are protocols in place to make sure that your kids are safe. So we need you to just think about why those are in place and to be encouraging towards the people that are trying to enforce that. So we've got a flow. It's very helpful if you go in the entrance, and whether you want to or not, you kind of go with the flow, come out the exit. It's even going to give you a few extra steps if you have the pedometer. Going to get some exercise. You're welcome. But also, like, the tags are so important. Keep the tags for your kids because we take safety very seriously, and if that causes us just a slight inconvenience, then praise God, it is worth it. So would you help us out with that? Help us out, especially with those who are sacrificially serving with the security team, the safety team, the kids. Just know that all of those different protocols are in place for their safety and for their discipleship. So do us a favor and help with that. Sound good? All right, let's move on. Let me invite you, if you have a Bible, to go ahead and open to 1 Samuel. If you don't have a Bible, there will be some scriptures here on the screen, but also somewhere in a chair close to you, there should be a Bible that you can grab in the chair rack under there. And if you don't have one, you are welcome to keep that one. And we've said this for the last couple weeks. We're just peppering in a lot of verses in these sermons as we're closing up this True and Better series. So I would highly encourage you to just jot down some of the scriptures, some of the chapters that we're going to look at. And if we don't have time to dive in deep, take some time with your family, with your friends, with your community group, with your fight club, and dig into some of these. But today, just putting my cards on the table, my goal for this morning is to finish up this series, True and Better, as we've been looking at the Old Testament and how God has designed all of these shadows, these prototypes of Christ to point us towards Jesus. And we're going to finish that this morning looking at Jesus as the true and the better David. But also, I'm going to do my best to try to pull all of these together that we've looked at the last few weeks, and to hopefully not just stir up your minds and to give us some new information, I'm sure that all of us, myself included, we're going to, or we have learned something mentally that we didn't know. That is not my end goal. Our end goal is to stir your affections towards Jesus, and hopefully your awe, that you walk out in absolute awe of what God has been doing since the beginning of creation to prepare the world for Christ. So just hear from me, the goal is not just to give us information. I think that's a pretty big miss if we just walk out with something new that we've learned. The goal is for it to stir up in your hearts an incredible worship and affection for Jesus Christ. And so maybe that plays itself out in a way for you that it hasn't, that just causes hopefully some deep worship and admiration and awe, but maybe even just expresses itself physically. You just want to hopefully raise your hands and sing and praise Jesus for who he is and what he's done, because he is the true and better David. And so each Sunday, I've kind of opened these sermons with a little bit of a cheesy illustration to kind of see what like a true and better idea is, that like something that was given to us as a shadow or a foreshadow, that like it was preparing us and preparing our expectations for something else, and we shouldn't miss the handoff. Are y'all open to one more cheesy one? Okay, good, because ready or not, here it comes. So we have 3 kids, and when our boys particularly were young, they just kind of navigated towards, as often young boys do, monster trucks and Tonka trucks and dump trucks and just big equipment that they were playing with. And I just remember thinking when they were young, watching them, like that's preparing them to one day when they get a big monster truck, and Lord willing, you know, they get a big bulldozer or they get some kind of earth mover. And just imagine, okay, that Christmas shows up and my boys, I give them a bulldozer, like a big full-size bulldozer. To my boys in the room, I am so sorry. This is not happening. This is just an illustration. But it shows up, and there's a giant monster truck or a bulldozer or something out in the front with a huge bow on it, and they can't really go out and enjoy it because, like, oh, that's great. And then they go back to their room. You know, imagine the 22 years old, full-grown man, put their footy pajamas on, lay on the floor, kick their feet up, and they're still playing with their little Tonka trucks. Like, no. Those were to kind of whet your appetite, get you excited, build your expectation, but put it away. It's just a toy. There's a real thing out in the driveway. Go grab a bulldozer. What could go wrong, right? Again, this is not happening, Hudson. I am so sorry. There's so many things in the Old Testament, we've spent weeks looking at them, that were designed to prepare the world and you for Jesus Christ. They're shadows, they're types, but there is incredible danger in latching onto those and missing the point of those. And we're going to terminate today with this idea that Jesus is, in fact, the true and the better David. And the first century Jews and many Jews today completely miss the handoff from David to Jesus because they're still putting so much hope in the prototype, in the shadow, and not Jesus. So I'm going to spend a bit of time trying to unpack for you just who David was, what he did, what he was known for, and then I'm going to unpack how Jesus is the true and better David, and then again take some time to zoom out and hopefully tie up this entire series. So if you're ready to hear about the true and better David, say ready. If you say the word David, the name David, to a first century, when Jesus was born, Jewish person, they would have known instantly, immediately who that was, and they would have a few things that would have come to mind because he was a big deal and had been for a long time. So let me rewind to 1,000 years BC, 1,000 years before Christmas, before Jesus is born. The nation of Israel was kind of wandering around. They didn't have a king. They were to be led by God, but then they all decided, well, we want a king because we want to be like everybody else. Every other nation around has a king, and so God decides, against his plan, to let them have what they want and to give them a king. Sermon for another day. Side note, sometimes God, like in his passive wrath, lets us have what we think we want to teach us that it's not what we need. And so he relents and he says, well, you're not going to like it. He's going to tax you. He's going to send your children to war. But he gives them what they ask for, to be like everybody else, a king. And the king that they get was a man named Saul. And on the outside, Saul would have made a great king. He was tall, dark, and handsome, and well-spoken. But it turned out that he was a pretty horrible king. And after quite a bit of time, it's apparent to everyone that Saul was a bad deal and a bad king for God's people. And so God rejects him, and then he comes up with this plan that he is going to go find and instill a new king. There was a prophet that was involved in this named Samuel, and Samuel was actually incredibly heartbroken when this happened because Samuel had invested a lot in Saul. He had kind of mentored Saul, he had prayed for Saul, and now he knows that God has rejected Saul. And so Samuel is heartbroken, he's frustrated, he probably is nervous about the future of Israel, knowing that maybe there's some spiritual and some organizational turmoil that's going to happen. And then this is when God speaks to Samuel and he gives him a plan to go anoint a new king. And this is the very first time that we hear about David. And this all happens in 1 Samuel chapter 16. So God is telling Samuel, hey, I'm reject Saul. He's not a good king. I've got a new king picked out. And of all the places, all the countries, all the cities, all the small dinky towns that God could have found a new king, you're going to find out this very specific place that God sends Samuel to. 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1. It says, "The Lord said to Samuel, 'How long will you grieve over Saul, since I've rejected him from being king over Israel? So fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite,'" which means he was from a little dinky town called Bethlehem. "For I have provided for myself a king among his sons." So Samuel is excited. He gets up. He journeys all the way to Bethlehem. He finds this man named Jesse. He says, "Hey, bring me your son because God has chosen him to be king." And so he brings his oldest son named Eliab. And Samuel gets excited. He's like, "Oh my gosh, this guy looks good. He's tall, he's dark, he's handsome, he's well-spoken. He's the oldest. Surely this is the king." And God says, no. That's not him. And then in verse 7, we hear what you probably have heard this before. It says, "But the Lord said to Samuel, don't look on his appearance or the height of his stature, because I've rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." And then Samuel's like, "Okay, well, bring your next son." And so he brings the next son, which is Abinadab, and same thing. Samuel gets excited. "Oh my gosh, this kid looks like a king." God says, no, not him. Rejects him. Third son comes out, Shammah, and same thing happens. Samuel gets excited. No, not him. And that happens time after time, son after son, 7 times, until all 7 sons are like moved past Samuel. He's disappointed, he's frustrated, and he's like, maybe I got the wrong Jesse in Bethlehem because God has said none of these are the chosen king. And then he's like, oh, well, I have one other son. He's kind of the runt, he's the youngest, he's not even here, he's doing some chores, he's out in the fields watching the sheep. And Samuel's like, okay, you go get him. Samuel says, go get him. When he gets there, God says, anoint him, because that's the one. And that's when we're introduced to David. Roughly 50, he was probably around 14, 15 years old when that happened. And then he just kind of has this moment where he's anointed by Samuel king and then just goes back to the sheep for 15-ish years. Till he's 30 years old, till he finally is put in the place as the rightful king over Israel, and he rules and he reigns as king for 40 years. Now, David is an unbelievably interesting guy. He's got so much that's written about him, that's written from him. So many books have been written about him. Movies have been made of him. I don't know if you've seen this. There's a new David movie coming out this week that actually the production company and some of the people behind it are Jesus-loving people from Midland, Texas. So go watch it. It's going to be great. But I'm just saying most of the things about David have to do with his life, his story, which is important. But my goal in the next few moments is not so much that, but it's to truly unpack what does it mean that Jesus is the true and the better David. And I could list a lot of different things about David, who he was, what he did, and we're going to zero in on 3 things about David that are probably not going to be new to you, And then we're going to unpack how Jesus is the true and better version of those, and then we'll zoom out, tie all this on a bow. That sound good? Well, here we go anyways. David was a shepherd. That's kind of the first thing that we find out about David, and he didn't know this, but God had been using this very mundane, ordinary thing to prepare him for his calling and for his role. Unbeknownst to him, he would learn so much being a shepherd that would help him shepherd God's people. As a shepherd in 1000 BC, a shepherd would be responsible for a handful of things. He would have a flock that would be entrusted to him, and they would be responsible for feeding, for leading, and for protecting. Because as you know, sheep do not do well on their own. They need a shepherd, and that shepherd leads them. So it's not like, we've said this for years, it's not like a West Texas cattle drive where a cowboy gets behind and pushes them. A shepherd goes before and normally sings, and the sheep follow them. So they're in charge of leading sheep where they should go and where they should not go. A shepherd is involved in feeding sheep to make sure they get to good pasture and have enough food and water to stay healthy. And then they're responsible for protecting them from cliffs. In the dark, sheep will wander off of cliffs. They're responsible for protecting them from predators, from wolves, from bears. Like, he was a shepherd and was learning all these things as he was doing this mundane task. And I think it's worth noting, David was basically the quintessential man. He was such a well-rounded man that he was tough when he needed to be tough. He was tender when he needed to be tender. He was like a full 360-degree man that he would, as a shepherd, be able to go out and spend days or weeks in the wilderness just camping, surviving, warding off lions and bears to protect the sheep. And then at the same time, he would be writing poetry and singing and playing his harp. So men in the room, learn from David that it's good to be a well-rounded man. He is tough when he needs to be tough, tender when he needs to be tender. He can kill a bear with his bare hands, wipe off most of the blood, and then play a harp, sing a beautiful song, and write a poem. I think that's just good and helpful. He was a quintessential man. He was a shepherd. David was a shepherd. Number two, you all know this. David slayed a giant. What was his name? This is the next chapter. Go read about it. Super fun story in 1 Samuel 17. This is what was going on. There was a battle between the Israelites and their arch nemesis, the Philistines, that were a wicked, pagan, God-hating country, and they were at war. And you find out in this chapter that there was kind of this place where all this was transpiring. There was a kind of a hill on this side, big valley in the middle, Israel over here, Philistines over here. They were supposed to be doing battle in the valley. But what had happened is that Goliath comes down and just mocks God, calls them out, calls them cowards, and says, if any of you are tough enough, come and fight me. And he taunts them and makes fun of God for 40 days. And of all the Jewish army, nobody had enough courage to come face this mammoth of a man, Goliath. And David had three brothers that were in the military, they were in the army, and David wasn't even supposed to be there. He was supposed to be taking care of the sheep, but he was bringing some supplies, and he ends up that day out there, and he sees what's going on, and he gets infuriated at the lack of faith and the cowardice of the people, and at how Goliath was mocking God. And so the underdog of all underdogs, David says, well, my God is big enough, I will do it. If nobody else will stand into this man mocking our God, I will do it. King Saul, not a good king, he's there, should have been fighting himself, but instead he lets little David go out there. So David, filled with courage, filled with faith, not in himself and his abilities, but in his God, y'all remember this, right? Tries to put on Saul's armor. It's too heavy. He's like, I can't use my slingshot with all this heavy armor on. So he puts the armor away, grabs 5 smooth stones, it says, from the brook, and goes down to face this monster man, this giant named Goliath. You know the story. He swings it, sinks a stone right in his forehead, kills him. He falls down with a big thud. David goes over there, cuts off his head, lifts it up, and the entire army and nation of Israel then are cheering in victory. Though they had not done a thing, they had not lifted a finger, they get to celebrate the victory over this giant just by virtue of this underdog who defeats Goliath. Like David slayed a giant. Third, David was a king. Okay, David was a king. Maybe that's what he's most known for. When you say the name David, you think of King David, even now 3,000 years removed. He served very faithfully, not perfectly, but faithfully as king over Israel. And listen to a few of the things that he did that would have made him a hero for hundreds and hundreds of years. He was a warrior king, which meant he was not only politically in charge, he was militarily in charge, and so he led the conquests over the enemies. He was a brilliant military leader. He united the nation, both kind of practically, but also he united the nation and encouraged them to worship God. So much so that he wrote psalms to help his people worship. He turned the heart of God's people back towards God, which is no small task. He himself was a worshiper that was a model that people could follow. The Bible calls him, God calls him a man after his own heart. Could you imagine if what was told about you is that you were a man or a woman after God's own heart, yet that was David, and yet he was deeply, deeply flawed. As incredible of an example as he was, he had his own moments of sin and weakness. You might know this, but he committed adultery, basically committed murder, and was a good king with very, very deep flaws. He was a king. David was a king. And then I want you to see how Jesus is the true and the better David. So first, let's kind of rewind. Jesus is the true and the better shepherd. Okay, if David was a shepherd that was in charge of leading, feeding, protecting the sheep, in John chapter 10, Jesus plays on this, I think, pretty heavily, knowing exactly what he's doing, knowing that he's playing off of this shepherd hero from the Old Testament, David. But in John 10, Jesus says this. He says, "The thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy, but I have come that you may have life abundantly." And then he says, "I am not a good shepherd, I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays his life down for the sheep." Jesus, as the good shepherd, leads the sheep. We talked about this last week, that God's people, Christians, aren't supposed to just be fans of Jesus and like cheering on. Like, we love Jesus, we're supposed to follow him and let him lead us, because that's what good shepherds do. They lead the sheep. He's a good leader of his sheep. He's a good feeder of his sheep. He feeds God people what you need to sustain your soul. His word, his promises, his Holy Spirit. He feeds his sheep to make sure that their souls are sustained. And then he protects his sheep from what comes after them. One of my favorite sermons that I've ever read in my life was a sermon that Charles Spurgeon preached almost 100 years ago, maybe more, where he was talking about Jesus as the good shepherd, and he used the illustration that on the cross Jesus was being a good shepherd, and he was putting the sheep behind him and facing Satan, sin, and death head on to protect the sheep. And at the great cost to himself, the fang of Satan tore open his side, pierced his side, and he wrestled Satan to the ground, drug him into a grave, and then rose again, because he's the good shepherd. David was a shepherd. Jesus is the true and the better shepherd. You need to know that. You need to understand how that works in your life. Jesus is the true and the better shepherd. But secondly, Jesus is the true and the better giant slayer. Okay, this is where sometimes sermons and pastors can get wonky and can kind of theologically miss the point, because I've heard before a pastor preach this, like, David killed Goliath, and his application was, and now, you're like David, and you need to go slay your giants and kill your Goliaths, right? Sounds all good and dandy, but if you kind of tweak that out a little bit, you're like, well, he's kind of saying that David was a shadow of us, and now we are the true and the better David that get to go be the hero and slay the giants. And you know this, the Bible is written for us, but not about us. David is not foreshadowing us. David is foreshadowing who? Jesus, the true and the better giant slayer. We looked at this last week, that Jesus did not just defeat Goliath, the enemy of the Israelites. Jesus defeated the enemy of humanity. Once and for all, Satan, sin, death, the grave, fear, shame, guilt. He faced a bigger Goliath than David ever could, and he slayed the enemy of humanity. He is the true and the better giant slayer. And then third, Jesus is the true and the better king. Listen to this promise. It was a covenant that God made with David as David was kind of nearing the end of his kingship, the end of his time. God made a very profound and eternal promise to David. We call it the Davidic Covenant. It's in 2 Samuel chapter 7. It says this, "When your days," God's speaking to David, "are fulfilled, and when you lie down with your fathers," saying, when you get old, David, and when you die, "I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom." I think in that he's actually referring to Solomon, who would be David's son, that would be a king, that would be the one that builds the temple. But then in verse 13, he says something that would extend way beyond Solomon. "He will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever." So God promises David that I am going to establish a throne, and a king will sit on that throne, not for one generation, not for 40 years. This is not going to be a king like David, totally different category. Not a king like Solomon, totally different category. A king that's going to rule and reign, not just over Israel, but over earth forever. That's this promise. And then, there was so much hope from the Jewish people in that promise, and then 1,000 years go by. 1,000 years from that promise, and in the middle of that, they lose their country, practically. They no longer have a king. They are overtaken by enemies and eventually end up where they are underneath the rule and the reign of Rome. They do not have one of their own kings. They are subject to the Roman emperor, and a pagan Roman would sit as king over God's people who had received this promise. And they're longing, like, "God, didn't you make us a promise that there's a king coming? And yet here we are. We don't get to rule ourselves. We don't get to decide what we do. We have some pagan king, some pagan country ruling over us." And this angst is still building up. And they go back, and they keep being drawn back to this promise that God had made. And surely after hundreds and hundreds of years go by, they're like, I don't know, maybe God can't do it. Maybe the Romans are stronger than God is, and maybe they begin to lose hope. Maybe they begin to wonder if God can fulfill his promise. 1,000 years go by, and then this little baby is born, and guess what? None other than Bethlehem, the city of David. When Jesus was born, both Luke and Matthew, of the four gospel writers, half of them that are writing to a Jewish audience, they follow the family tree of Jesus, and they prove the lineage back to who? To David. To say, no, this little baby, he actually came from the lineage of David, and he is the rightful heir to sit on the throne and to fulfill this promise that was made. And then in Matthew, you can go back and look at that. That's Luke 1 and Matthew 1. And then in Matthew chapter 2, you've all heard this. This is read all over the planet. When we get to Christmas time, it's when the wise men, the magi, show up. So let's read it together. Matthew 2, verse 1. It says, "Now after Jesus was born," who was born in Bethlehem from the tribe and the lineage of David. He was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the what? The king. There was already a king. Herod was the king. "Behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying to Herod," to the current king who is in power, who does not like sharing power, "Where is he who has been born the king of the Jews?" He goes to a wicked pagan king. He's like, "Hey, where's the new king? For we saw his star when it rose, and we've come to worship him." And when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, he was jealous, he was scared, he was threatened. And so if you know the story, you know that he basically lies to the wise men. He's like, oh, I have been looking for this king as well. I would like to worship him. You go find him, and when you do, text me the coordinates and send them to me, because I, being a humble king, want to go worship and pay homage to this new king that you say that has been born. And we learn later on in the story that he's lying. He wants them to tell him where he is because he's threatened and wants to kill this supposed king. And then he goes so far as to issue an edict where young boys are all killed because he's threatened there might be a new king. We don't have time to tell the whole story. So let's fast forward roughly 33 years. So Jesus, this baby he came from the tribe and the lineage of David. He's born in Bethlehem. He's destined, been anointed as the king. Kind of was off minding his own business. He lived his life. He taught. He performed miracles. He trained some disciples. And then he gets to the point of laying his life down on the cross, and he is brought up, he's put on trial. And because the Jewish people weren't the leaders, he has to be put on trial for the Romans. And what you find out is that he has to meet before this judge named Pilate. And Pilate is overseeing this sentencing of Jesus. And the problem that the Jews had mainly with Jesus, why they wanted him executed, is because Jesus claimed that he was God. The problem that the Romans had was that Jesus claimed that he was king, and there can only be one king, and they thought, well, that's a threat to Herod, that's a threat to the Roman Empire. If you say you're king, you got to go. The Jews say, well, if you say you're God, you've got to go. So everybody decides they're going to put him to death, and then they execute him. And both parties walked away from that thinking, well, that's over. The Jews thinking, well, he's not God because he just died, and he's not the king that we were looking for because David was way better than that. They walked away from the crucifixion thinking that was the most pathetic revolt we've ever had. It was snuffed out before it even started. He didn't ever pull out a sword. He didn't raise this insurrection. It would have been a perfect time. There was so much unrest. Everybody was frustrated. They didn't want Rome to be there. They knew there was a promise. They knew there was a king. They thought, Jesus is it. He's the king we've been after. Now's his chance. Stir up the people. Tell them to grab their swords, get their weapons, because this is our moment. And instead, Peter pulls out a sword. Jesus tells him to put it down, and then he goes to the cross. They were very, very disappointed in Jesus. Why? They were too in love with the shadow. They were expecting him to be way more like David than Jesus. They were expecting somebody to come in and set up a throne in Jerusalem where they would have relative peace for one more generation, 40 years at best. They missed Jesus not because he was doing something too small. They completely missed him because what Jesus was doing was way bigger than they could imagine. They were expecting a king with a crown of jewels. They got a king with a crown of thorns. They were expecting a king that would just set up and rule and reign in moderate peace for one generation, not a king that would die for his people, rise from the grave to rule and to reign over earth forever and ever. And so the Romans had the same problem. Well, that's done. We dealt with that insurrection. He's dead now. What can he do? If they could see him now. Right? They thought they put the revolution of Jesus to bed, and here we are, 2.5 billion people worshiping him. Why? Because he's the true and the better David. He was doing something so much bigger than they could ever fathom, and they missed him because they were in love with the shadow. Here comes the actual monster truck, and they're still playing with the toy. Here comes Jesus, and they're still hoping for the shadow. This is how this perhaps connects with you and I. We probably put way more hope in the shadow than Christ, especially as we think about, we don't have kings, right, in America. We have presidents, but so many times we can put so much hope in a new president that's going to come in and fix everything. Do we need new good politicians? Absolutely. They're not ever going to usher in what only Jesus can do. Jesus is the true and the better king. And so he's before Pilate, and Pilate's big question for him was, okay, I have the power to execute you. I just need to know the answer to this question. Are you the king? Are you the king of the Jews? Even Pilate had this very, very small understanding of Jesus as a king. And Jesus says, not like you think. My kingdom is not of this world. What Jesus was doing as king was infinitely bigger than what David did as king. Which leads us to this verse that we hear all the time at Christmas time, that when you understand the depth of it, it just seems to make way more sense. This is Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. 700 years before Christ, this is talking about Jesus as the true and the better David. He says, "For unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders." He's going to be a ruler, a reigner. "His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end." Not one generation and one sequestered place in the Middle East. "Of the rule and reign and extension of peace under this king, it will know no end. And on the throne of David," this is the promise that was made in 2 Samuel, "on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish and to uphold it with justice," perfect justice, "with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this." Jesus is the true and the better David. Now, I want to zoom out for a moment, and apologies if you are just coming into this series for this. Go back and listen to the last few weeks, because what I want to do is zoom out enough to stir our hearts and our minds to see Jesus as the true and the better everything. And I want to tune us into Revelation chapter 5, which, to be honest, Revelation can be a tough book. Anybody read it? Walked away with some questions, maybe? It can be a tough book where you're not sure what is going on. There's so much like vivid illustrations, and you're not sure what's literal or what's metaphoric. But I want to point us towards Revelation, and not just close this sermon, but close this series. And again, not to just give us new information, but to truly stir up your hearts to do what you were created by God to do, to worship Christ and to be in awe of Him. And so Revelation chapter 5, it gives us this picture that Jesus is the true fulfillment. He is the true and the better everything. And so this is the Apostle John that was given this revelation by the Holy Spirit of things that would happen. Most assuredly, God will make these things happen, but he sees them so crystal clear as though they're happening right before his eyes. And it says this in Revelation 5, verse 1, the Apostle John. He says, "And then I saw in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne." He doesn't envision this little throne in Jerusalem. He sees the throne over all people and the throne of the earth, and there's somebody sitting on this throne. And a scroll was written within, and on the back sealed with 7 seals, and I saw a mighty angel, big, strong, magnificent, glorious, probably terrifying angel next to this person on the throne with a loud, booming voice saying, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and to break its seals?" And at that point you might be like, I have no idea what they're talking about. Let me kind of give you what I think is happening with these seals and with this scroll. Basically what you're going to see is there's this angst over who is worthy to be worshiped by everyone, and who is strong enough to fix the brokenness. It's just this feeling that every one of you have felt. Every human from the beginning of time has felt the brokenness in humanity, and something deep down in you testifies like, this is not how it's supposed to be. It's so broken. There's so much pain. There's so much darkness. There's so much evil. There's so much sin. There's so much wickedness. There's so much injustice. But equally, every person, every culture feeling that, we're also like, who's going to fix it? Who's going to fix it? Who can put it back together? Who can redeem it? Who can restore it? Who can find the lost? Who can heal the broken? Who can restore the sinners? So who can do it? That's what's going on with these seals and the scroll in verse 3. And it says, no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. And John's like, and I began to weep. He's like, I began to weep loudly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it. He's like, we're just stuck. This is just how it's going to be. Death and destruction rule and reign, because he's looking at us like, there's nobody. He's weeping loudly as he sees this picture, and he feels what you and I have all felt. And he has this deep sense, you can feel it if you read into this, of a hopelessness. The brokenness is too much. The darkness is too thick. He's hopeless. Humanity is in such problem. And maybe he's running through. He's like, oh, maybe Adam can fix it. No. Man, Adam, he made a mess of it. Oh, no, maybe Abraham can fix it. I mean, Abraham was like, he was a picture and a shadow of Christ. Maybe, and no, Abraham was broken. Isaac. Maybe Isaac, the pure, the innocent son that was willing to carry the wood for his own sacrifice up the mountain of Calvary. Maybe it's him. Maybe he can put all this mess back together. It's like, no, he can't. He was just like us. Maybe it's Melchizedek. No, Melchizedek can't do it. Oh, Moses can fix the problem. And he realizes, man, Moses is broken just like everybody else. He's dead and in the grave. Maybe David, maybe King David can fix it. Maybe he's the one worthy to open the scroll. He's like, David, he was deeply flawed and broken. Like, I hope that you feel this angst that is the problem for every person and every culture on the planet. Something is radically broken. Who on earth can fix it? Verse 5. I get this picture. I just connected this Friday afternoon in my study. As I was reading through Revelation 5 and like feeling the angst of John, like who's the anointed one to fix this? I was drawn back to Samuel. It's like, okay, this is the son that's going to fix it. Nah, it's not him. Oh, this is the son that, no, that's not him. And then he gets through all seven. He's like, guess we're hopeless. And then Jesse's like, I do have one other son. He's busy. He's out in the fields, just being a shepherd. Let me call him in. So he runs through thinking of this problem in heaven. Okay, Adam's not it. He's not the chosen one. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David. Oh, gosh. And God's like, I do have one more. I do have one more. He's actually been busy out as a shepherd. He's been feeding the lambs. He's been leading the sheep. He's been protecting the flock. He just defended them over their greatest enemy. Let me call him in for a second. Verse 5. And one of the elders said to me, weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David. Not the fruit of David, not the one that came from David, the one that David came from. Meaning Jesus is eternal. The root of David, he has conquered so that he can open the scroll in its 7 seals. And between the throne, it's the throne of the universe, and the 4 living creatures, and among the elders I saw the Lamb. Okay, not the pretty little fluffy lamb that for all the Old Testament was sacrificed as a foreshadowing, not a lamb, the Lamb, standing as though he had been slain, with 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And he went, and he took the scroll from the right hand of him who was seated on the throne. And when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders, they fell down before the Lamb, each holding a harp of all instruments, and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song, saying, worthy are you to take the scroll, to open its seal, for you were slain. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation, and you have made them a kingdom of which he is the king, and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth. And then I looked, and I heard around the throne and the living creatures and the elders the voice of many angels, numbering myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, and I want to pause there, they were saying and doing what you and I should say and do. This is the logical culmination of realizing that Jesus is the true and the better everything. It's not just information that we pack away knowing. It has got to deeply affect you where you turn all of your being back to worship Jesus. This is what they did needs to be what we do. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. And I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea and all that is in them saying, to him who sits on the throne, the King of kings, the true and the better David, and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever, because Jesus is the true and the better. So I hope and I pray this is not just, although I hope it is, good information where we learn something. Jesus is what you are searching for. He is the only one worthy and only one able, worthy to be worshiped, able to put the pieces back together. He will rule and he will reign as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and he has called you in to be part of his kingdom. We're going to sing a song in a moment that it's straight out of Revelation 5. And I hope and I pray that you will worship God from the deepest place of your being when you recognize he is the true and the better David. Let me pray for us. Father, we ask that you would help us to respond as we should, to respond as you deserve. God, to recognize all of history before Christ was preparing and pointing the world towards his entrance. God, now as we look back and it's unfolding before us, we get a chance to be in awe of you, to worship you. I pray that your Spirit would wrestle everyone's heart right now to a place where they recognize you're the only one that can save, you're the only one that can restore, that you are worthy to open the scrolls, and that you would help us to worship. God, fully engaged, our arms, our voices, our posture, our hearts, our words, to worship the true and the better. We praise your name, Jesus, and I pray this in your name. Amen.